Welcome to the Deep Dive, the place where we tackle complexity and, well, hopefully turn it into something clear. Today, we're looking at a civilization so huge, so varied, it's almost less a nation and more, maybe a continent. We're diving into China, and our sources are really arguing that its geography isn't just scenery, it's basically the architect of China's history.
It really is an incredible geographical puzzle. I mean, think about the sheer scale. It's up there with Russia and the USA size-wise. We're talking 3,000 miles from coast to interior.
That distance alone.
Exactly. And it covers pretty much every climate you can think of. You've got tropical Hainan in the south, right up to subarctic Manchuria in the north. No single government can really manage that uniformly.
Which is the heart of our deep dive today, isn't it?
Yeah.
How that diverse landscape created these fundamental splits in economy, culture, even how it was governed. It leads to this idea of multiple Chinas.
That's the frame, yes.
And the sources hit you right away with this pretty stark statistic. Something like 2/3 of the land is tough terrain. Mountains, plateaus, deserts.
Right, which naturally puts serious limits on farming, on transport, on connection.
And the most challenging part is out west.
Uh-huh. The Tibetan Plateau, that's Tibet and Qinghai. Immense mountains. But here's the paradox. Those same daunting mountains are also China's lifeline.
How so?
Well, the melting snows from those highlands, they feed the great rivers. That's where the vital water comes from. And nowadays, the hydroelectric power, too. It sustains everything downstream.
Okay, so the mountains feed the rivers. And the rivers, then? They carve out the major cultural divides. Our sources seem to point to two main geographical lines splitting north and south.
That's right. It really boils down to the Qinling Mountains and the Yangtze River. Think of them less as just lines on a map and more as historical fault lines.
Fault lines dictating culture.
Yeah. They separate the traditional northern heartland, think wheat and millet, from the south, which is all about intensive rice farming. Very different ways of life.
Okay, let's start where Chinese civilization really began then. In that northern heartland, the sources call it the struggling north, centered on the Yellow River, the Huanghe.
The Yellow River was absolutely central. It flows right through those original civilized areas on the Central Plains. Shaanxi provinces.
But you mentioned a paradox earlier about the agriculture there.
Yes, it's fascinating. Farming there relies heavily on something called loess soil. It's this really fine yellowish silt that blows in from Inner Mongolia, blanketing the plains, especially in Shaanxi and Gansu.
That's fertile.
Very fertile, yes. And porous. It allowed for settled agriculture to develop. But, and this is the aha moment, really,
There's always a but.
that same loess soil is also the river's greatest threat. It's so fine, the river constantly picks it up, carries it along, and then deposits it as silt.
So the riverbed builds up.
Builds up incredibly fast, faster than the river can naturally scour it away. This meant, from the very beginning, massive, constant human effort was needed. Huge construction projects, basically.
Just to keep the river contained.
Exactly. And here's the detail that honestly stops me cold every time. In many places, the Yellow River actually flows 50 meters or even more above the level of the surrounding plain.
50 meters? Wait, that's like... It's flowing on a massive artificial ridge built over centuries?
Precisely, like a gigantic, miles-long aqueduct held up by human-built embankments. It's an astonishing feat of engineering, but also...
An accident waiting to happen.
Constantly.
A perpetual threat. It's like a sword of Damocles hanging over the whole region. And if you think about what that means for governing, maintaining those embankments wasn't just infrastructure work. It was the state's core existential duty.
And the sources draw a direct line, historical.
Oh, absolutely. They're explicit.
Yes.
If the central government failed at flood control, if it got too corrupt or weak to manage the dikes, disaster followed.
Massive floods, the river changing course.
Wiping out farmland, displacing millions. And that suffering led directly to unrest, disorder, peasant rebellions, often the downfall of the dynasty itself.
So controlling the river was controlling China, in a sense, at least the north. It placed a huge burden, political, financial, right, on the center of power. And on top of that, the north had other limitations compared to the south.
I could climb.
Yeah. Less reliable rainfall, frequent droughts, a shorter growing season because of the cold. They couldn't really rely on rice, which needs a lot of water.
So they stuck to hardier grains.
Wheat, oats, millet, those became the staples. It inherently limited the population density and the agricultural surplus compared to what was possible further south.
Okay, so the north, defined by this constant battle against the river, against the climate. Let's contrast that with the south. Once you cross the Qinling Mountains and the Yangtze, The picture changes completely.
It really flips. The south is dominated by the Yangtze River, the country's largest waterway. And the crucial difference, the Yangtze is mostly navigable.
So it's natural infrastructure.
Exactly. It connects the southeast coast really effectively with its huge hinterland, stretching way back into the southwest. The South didn't have to build its main transport artery, the river just provided it.
That must have led to a totally different economic and maybe even political model.
It certainly facilitated trade and movement in a way the North couldn't easily replicate. Plus, you generally have abundant rainfall and good soil down south. That created the perfect conditions for intensive agriculture.
Rice farming.
Primarily rice, yes. The kind of wet paddy agriculture we often picture when we think of traditional China.
And even within the South, there's variation.
Oh, definitely. You have places like the Sichuan Basin, sort of nestled inland. It has this mild, humid climate protected by mountains, making it incredibly fertile, a real breadbasket.
And further south.
Well, once you get below the Nanling mountain range, you're into tropical climates. That allowed for planting 2 crops a year in many areas. Incredible productivity. Even areas west of Nanling, like Guizhou and Yunnan, had a strong agricultural base.
It sounds like the South had it all: transport, fertility,
Mm-hmm.
and the sources mention excellent ports in the southeast coast too, access to maritime trade.
Yes, ports like Guangzhou were major hubs, reached by ships from South Asia, Southeast Asia, even West Asia for centuries.
But here's a question. Despite that access, the sources say traditional China usually oriented itself inland. Why turn away from the sea?
That's a really important point. I think it goes back to state priorities. Traditional Chinese power was built on controlling land, agriculture, and the population, and of course managing that northern river.
The Yellow River.
Right. The coast, despite its economic potential, was often seen as, well, peripheral, maybe even a bit risky pirates, foreign influences. The real measure of dynastic strength was control over the vast agricultural interior and its peasant population, not necessarily maritime trade.
Interesting. Control the land, control the people. But even the fertile South wasn't immune to nature's power, right?
No, definitely not. The trade-off for all that water is risk. The southeast coast is right in the path of powerful typhoons and seasonal monsoons.
Leading to massive flooding there too.
Absolutely devastating coastal flooding, huge loss of life. So, if the North lived in fear of the river breaking its banks, the South lived in fear of the sea itself rising up.
Which brings us to the wider picture of disasters.
Yeah.
The sources list quite a range that have hammered this land over centuries.
It's a tough place geographically. Floods, obviously, in both the Yellow River Basin and the coastal South. Then you have devastating earthquakes historically near Beijing, and more recently, tragically, in Sichuan.
And the North has those dust storms.
Yeah, huge dust storms blowing down from Inner Mongolia. They can create hazardous conditions impacting health and daily life, and that's before you even get to the biological threats farmers faced. Locust plagues, birds, animals destroying crops.
A constant struggle. But it wasn't just nature, was it? The sources also point to, well, environmental self-sabotage. Human actions making things worse.
Yes, this is crucial, especially the historical impact of deforestation. Widespread, often unregulated felling of trees, particularly in the north.
Why was that so damaging?
Well, trees hold the soil together, they act as windbreaks, they regulate water flow. When you remove that vegetation cover on a massive scale, you get severe soil erosion by wind and water.
Leading to desertification.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's contributed significantly to the expansion of deserts like the Gobi. It's a classic case of short-term needs timber, clearing land for farming, creating a long-term environmental debt.
And are we seeing the consequences of that debt today? Connecting historical mismanagement to modern problems.
We absolutely are. That historical environmental stress, especially the scarcity of good land and water in the north, now clashes directly with modern industrial pressures.
Like air pollution.
Right. Poor air quality in cities like Beijing is a very visible symptom.
Yeah.
It's driven by heavy reliance on coal for energy and heating, plus, massive increases in unregulated vehicle emissions.
And water. You mentioned scarcity earlier.
The water crisis is maybe even more critical, though less visible sometimes. Industrial pollution, chemical runoff from factories, untreated sewage has fouled so many lakes, rivers, and streams. This further contaminates the already limited supplies of drinkable water, especially in the north. Historical scarcity is now dangerously compounded by modern pollution.
It's a heavy legacy. Okay, let's shift focus slightly to the political map itself. How did this vast, difficult geography shape China's borders and identity? The sources stress that China today is much bigger than it used to be.
Oh, vastly bigger. The territory controlled by modern China dwarfs that of even the great historical dynasties like the Han or the Tang.
Really?
Yeah. And it's surprising how recently some major areas were fully incorporated. Take Yunnan province in the southwest. It didn't really become a stable part of China until the Mongol Yuan dynasty in the 13th century.
Wow. And Xinjiang?
Xinjiang is even more recent. It accounts for a huge chunk of land, maybe 1/6 of modern China, and it wasn't brought under firm dynastic rule until the Qing in the 18th century.
So looking back, especially, say, from the early centuries CE, the story of China is, well, the sources call it a narrative of colonization, expanding outwards from that Yellow River core.
That's a key interpretation of the long sweep of history, yes. A gradual, centuries-long expansion, primarily south and west from that original northern base.
But it wasn't just conquest, right? As territory was added, there was interaction.
Definitely. The expanding Chinese state didn't just wipe out existing cultures. It had to incorporate, or at least deal with, new cultural patterns, different values from the native peoples and the various non-Chinese groups living on the frontiers. It was a complex, though Central Han culture certainly became dominant over time.
Yet the sources emphasize that central control didn't mean everyone became the same. Localism remained strong.
Very strong. The sheer size and geographical barriers made true top-down homogenization almost impossible. Even under firm imperial rule, many regions kept their distinct identities, dialects, customs, ways of life. Geography fostered diversity.
And geography also defined the external borders, who China's neighbors were.
Absolutely. To the north and west, you hit mountains and deserts terrain unsuitable for the intensive farming that defined central China. That created a natural, though often contested, boundary.
So north of China proper, it wasn't farming country.
Generally not. Short growing seasons, cold temperatures. It was primarily the domain of nomadic peoples.
What kind of lifestyles?
Varied. Up in Manchuria, closer to Siberia, you had hunting and fishing communities. Further west, the huge Gobi Desert was a major barrier, limiting agricultural expansion. That whole area, modern Inner Mongolia and Mongolia itself, was dominated by nomadic herders for millennia.
The relationship was different, not expansion, but defense.
Largely. The main strategic challenge from the north wasn't about conquering farmland. It was about defending against mobile, often powerful nomadic groups, a very different dynamic than the southward expansion.
And this pattern of expansion and resistance continues right up to modern times. You mentioned the Qing dynasty moving into Mongolia.
Yes, was the last great imperial expansion in the 17th and 18th centuries. The push into Xinjiang in particular was partly driven by strategic concerns, but also by access to resources. Oil, coal, valuable minerals were known to be there.
But that expansion came with problems.
Significant problems, yes. Annexing Xinjiang brought a large non-Chinese population under Beijing's rule, primarily Turkic peoples, mostly Muslim, and there's been considerable ongoing friction and turbulence ever since, as that population often chafes under central control. The legacy of that expansion is very much alive today.
So wrapping this up, this deep dive really highlights how China's physical environment wasn't just a stage, it was an active force. It dictated the economy, rice versus millet, south versus north. It shaped the political challenge, that constant struggle with the Yellow River being tied to dynastic legitimacy itself.
Right. And it fostered that persistent tension between central control and stubborn local identities simply because the geography made unification so incredibly difficult. The challenge was always how to govern this impossibly diverse landmass.
But there's a final crucial point the sources raise, a sort of caveat about how we understand this history.
Yes, it's about the records themselves. Our written history of China comes almost entirely from the perspective of the central government, the imperial court, the bureaucracy.
The view from the capital.
Exactly. And those official records often downplayed or simply ignored local variations, regional differences, dissent, opposition to central policies, all the things happening out in those diverse peripheries shaped by geography.
That's the history that gets missed. So the final thought for you, our listener, if the official story, the one written by the winners in the center, often smoothed over the incredible regional diversity and local resistance inherent in China's geography, how much of what we think we know is an incomplete picture?
How much richness, how much complexity lies hidden in the lived realities of those multiple Chinas that existed far from the Yellow River heartland, shaped by their own unique mountains, rivers, and climates?
It suggests there's still so much more to understand, hidden in the regional histories beneath the grand imperial narrative. Something to think about.